2022 in review, despite strong evidence that humans have played a role in catastrophic weather events and the emergence of a fossil fuel sparked by the war in Ukraine, greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise. Nonetheless, the UN kept the climate emergency higher on the international agenda, reaching major agreements on financing and biodiversity. That's 2022, year in review. At the end of 2021, when the United Nations Climate Conference called COP26 wrapped up in Glasgow, none of those present could have suspected that the war in Ukraine would throw the global economy into turmoil, convincing many nations to suspend their commitments to a low carbon economy as they scramble to reduce the dependence on Russian oil and gas supplies and secure fossil fuel supplies elsewhere. No one could have expected this at the end of 2021. Meanwhile, a host of studies pointed to the continued warming of the planet and the failure of humanity to lower carbon emissions and get to grip with the existential threat of the climate emergency. Nonetheless, conferences after conferences after conferences, led by the UN, resulted not only to achieving international climate agreements while putting sustained pressure on major economies to make greater efforts to cut their fossil fuel use and support developing countries whose citizens are bearing the brunt of drought, floods, extreme weather resulting from man-made climate change. But this conference is resulting in bringing the world together to agree to the fundamentals that are needed to pave the way forward. Record heat waves were recorded in several European countries, to a worsening drought in the Horn of Africa that is resulting in food crisis displacing millions of people. While some regions were suffering from lack of water as a result of drought, heat waves, others were hit by catastrophic floods, like in Pakistan, where we saw heavy flooding and landslides caused by monsoon rains. We saw around a third of the country underwater at the height of the crisis, with tens of millions of people displaced. Unprecedented floods in Chad affected more than 340,000 people in August of 2022. And in October, the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, declared many people in West and Central African region needed it amid the worst floods in a decade. That's 2022 in review. But we also saw a lot of countries addicted to fossil fuels, because in October we saw the Greenhouse Gas Bulletin, where the World Meteorological Organization detailed record levels of the three main gases, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. We saw the biggest year-on-year jump in concentration in 40 years, identifying human activity as a principal factor in the changing climate. Yet, despite all the evidence, the UNEP Emissions Gap report that shows that we need to shift to a low carbon economy, the world major economies responded to the energy crisis precipitated by the war in Ukraine by reopening old power plants and searching for new oil and gas supplies. We saw the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, decried this reaction of opening new gas plants, calling it disillusional, and arguing that if they had invested in renewable energy in the past, these countries would have avoided the price instability of the fossil fuel markets. And that's why renewable energy is the peace plan for the future. Now let's move to clean, healthy environment, which was declared as a universal human right, where we saw in July a decision by the United Nations General Assembly to declare that access to a clean and healthy environment is a universal human right, which was held as an important milestone, building on a similar text adopted by the Human Rights Council in 2001. The landmark development with this passage will help reduce environmental injustice. Yes, it will help close protection gaps. Yes, it will help empower people, especially those in vulnerable situations, including environmental human rights defenders, including children, youth, women, and indigenous people. Very, very important. That's happened in 2022, the year in review. Then came COP27, where we saw loss and damage funding agree, which was a win for developing countries. Because at COP27, the UN Climate Conference, which was held in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh in November, agreed to establish a funding mechanism to compensate vulnerable nations for the loss and damage caused by climate-induced disasters. And this was a big win for the entire world, especially for developing countries, because these nations have spent decades arguing for such a provision. So the inclusion was held as a major advance. Yes, it is. But details on how the mechanism will work and who will benefit will now be worked out in the coming months towards COP28. Then came Enhanced Biodiversity Protection Framework, which was agreed in Montreal in December of 2022 this year. After 2 years of delays and postponement resulting from COVID-19 pandemic, the 15th UN Biodiversity Conference, COP15, finally took place in Montreal this December, concluding with an agreement to protect 30% of the planet's land, of the planet's coastal areas, of the planet inland waters by the end of the decade. And as the UN Environment Executive Director Inga described it, he described the outcome as a first step in resetting our relationship with the natural world. How important can this be? Very, very important, because the world biodiversity is in a perilous state with around 1 million species facing extinction. And everyone agreed, from scientists, that the crisis will grow with catastrophic results for humanity unless we interact with nature in a more sustainable way. We need nature to survive. We cannot destroy nature. So the deal officially, the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, includes impressive commitments. But these now need to be turned into action, just as with climate change. And this has been a major sticking point. And now we need to move forward with the hope that this platform will help countries to ramp up implementation, will help them to turn the blueprint into reality. The year 2022 in review from an environmental perspective. This is what you should have in mind as we move into 2023. And 2023 will be implementation, implementation, implementation. And it will take each and every one of us to play our part, because nature is the fundamental underpinning for our survival. And when we destroy nature, then we destroy the very species in which we're supposed to coexist. Nature needs us, but we need nature more than nature needing us. When we destroy nature, we destroy ourselves. And we must protect nature, because we've been destroying nature at the expense of our own survival. Let's play our part, because environment is our own security. Thank you.